I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the Observatory on Latin America to this public lecture, with which we complete the third edition of the President Nestor Kirchner Fellowship 2013-2014. We already had in November the lecture of one of the three fellows selected for this year, and today we will have the other two. I want to talk a little bit about the Observatory on Latin America. It was formally launched at the New School in September 2006 by the current Argentine President, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, and it is directed by Michael Cohen. I'm pleased again in this occasion to talk about the main objectives of the OLA. There are three. It's to study, to link, and to mobilize. The first is to study and observe the process of political and economic change in Latin America. The second objective is to link institutions in the US and Latin America by strengthening the understanding and the challenges of building social democracies in a globalized world. For this purpose, we have created opportunity for Latin American leaders, representatives, academics to directly express their views in New York. And overall, the OLA hosted 70 events in the New School in Argentina, in Mexico, and in Ecuador. The third objective is to mobilize resources and ideas together with Latin American institutions to foster the goals. I'd like to talk a little bit about the programs of the OLA. The OLA is organized around 5 teams. First, the President Nestor Kirchner Fellowship, about which we are gathered tonight. The second is Latin America on the Move program, which brings speakers to New York. And we have among them the President of Uruguay, Tabaré Vázquez. We have, as a presidential candidate from Peru, Ollanta Humala, some years ago, while he was a candidate. We have President Nestor Kirchner several times, and the last in 2010, that it was his last international presentation 1 month before he died. And we have also Rafael Correa, President of Ecuador in 2011. Another program is the Building Latin American Bicentennials. We have done 2 international call for papers. We published already a book about the first one, and we are in the process of publishing the second book about the second call. And what is interesting is that this call actually put the OLA in the map with enormous amount of hits and people visiting the webpage. We have another program, which is Design and Social Development, which is a 3 years collaborative program with the universities in Bangkok and Buenos Aires. And we are now launching a new initiative, the Cuba program, and we are holding a meeting in May 16 to update in general about the changes occurring in Cuba now. We are very pleased to welcome Ambassador Ana Lucy Cabral Petersen, Consul General of Brazil, and Ambassador Elsa Gladys Cifuentes Aranzazu, Consul General of Colombia. And now I am honored to introduce our Executive Dean, David Scobie, who will continue the chairing of this session.
Thank you, Marga, and welcome to everyone. My name is David Scobie. I'm the Dean of the New School for Public Engagement, the division that includes the Observatory on Latin America, and I want to congratulate my colleagues, Marga Gutmann and Mike Cohn and others, for making the Observatory such a vibrant center of intellectual and public work about Latin America. We're here this evening to celebrate the President Nestor Kirchner Fellowship Program, which is now completing its 3rd year and about to launch its 4th year of activity, and also to celebrate our final 2 fellows, and even more importantly, to listen to them and hear what they have to say about their work. The fellowship is a partnership between the New School and the Universidad Nacional de San Martin in Buenos Aires, UNSAM. Its mission is to bring promising young policy experts and scholars who combine scholarly achievement and public service in their own work to talk about their work, to discuss it with students and faculty at the New School, to have a chance to deepen their own work and to deepen our understanding of the policy issues that they take on. The Nestor Kirchner Fellowship Program is made possible with the generous support of Julian Studley, as well as the Universidad Nacional de San Martin, and I want to just take this moment to thank both of them for making it possible. The fellowship is a highly competitive process. In fact, this year there were 100 applicants from 10 countries across Latin America. It's a 3-step selection process with a jury reading initial applications, a 2nd round of rankings, and then final selections made by an international jury from representing 10 different countries that includes faculty, ministers, ambassadors, national policy leaders from across Latin America, our own university president, David Van Zandt, as well as Carlos Ruta, the rector of the Universidad Nacional de San Martin. I was myself lucky enough to be part of the jury 2 years ago and in Buenos Aires for the final selection. And I can testify not only to how strong the applicants were in the range of policy issues that they took on, but how deep the conversation among the jurors was. It was really a fascinating seminar in the range of issues that policy leaders and scholars across Latin America are taking on. It's a truly wonderful program. I also want to acknowledge and thank the new coordinator of the Observatory in Latin America, Desiree LaVecchia, who worked hard to kind of manage the process and the logistics for the fellowship and support the visits of our 2 Kirchner Fellows. The 2 final winners this year whom we're celebrating tonight and whom we will hear from are María Villa from Colombia and Fernando Kleiman from Brazil. I'm going to let them be introduced by our 2 distinguished consuls general, whom Marga introduced to you, but I'm very, very excited to hear what they have to say. I also want to announce that the call for next year's Kirchner Fellowship competition opened on March 1st, a few days ago, and we will be receiving applications from now until May 31st. I'm very, very excited, and I know that we will build on the success of the program. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Ana Cabral, the Consul General for Brazil.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. David Scobie, Executive Dean of New School of Public Engagement, Mrs. Elsa Fuentes, Consul General of Colombia, New York, Mrs. Villa, Mr. Kleiman, winners of the President Nestor Kirchner Fellowship, professor, students, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank for this opportunity of being here and present my colleague that is coming for this fellowship. I think that these activities enhance the importance of South American topics and researches in the academic world. It's an honor to introduce Mr. Fernando Kleiman, this young Brazilian that has a call for public service. Mr. Kleiman is graduating in economics in the University of São Paulo, has a master's degree in sociology in the University of Brasilia, and is a specialist in public policies and government management. Is currently assigned as a special advisor to the Brazilian Minister of Social Development. The opportunity of the President Kirchner Fellows is not only to be in a different and new environment, but to allow discussing ideas with different people, different regions, different nationalities. And I think this is a very relevant context for young people like these two that won this scholarship. It's certainly meaningful to have this experience outside South America. Most important, there is a dual dynamic that gives the young researchers the opportunity of being representatives of their countries as well as spokesmen for South America. This fellowship aims at regional integration and sets South America as a global point of reference of critical and independent thinking. The challenges in Brazil have been facing towards development, that Brazil has been facing towards development breed the necessity to create local and new public policies. In this path, we accumulate both successful and an unsuccessful experience, but we believe we have to share both of them, not only as a model, but also as a reference on specific development topics. Regarding the issue of decent work, Brazil has made great achievements in the last years, putting into action public policies to guarantee decent work for rural workers, assure rights of domestic workers, and to supervise the observance of migrant workers' rights, among other activities in this area. I'm sure we could have had other better names, but Mr. Kleiman is a wonderful representative to comment his experience. Thank you all. And good evening, Mr. Council of Argentina.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here tonight. First of all, I'd like to thank the new school for providing me such an experience, being part of this fellowship, the President Nestor Kirchner Fellowship. I'd like to thank David Scobie in the name of the new school, and also the UNSAM, the University of San Martin, for this opportunity. I'd like to thank the Ambassador Ana Cabral for such words, which I hope I can make use of in my presentation. I would like to thank Elsa Fuentes, Consul General de Colombia as well, and Michael Coe and Margarida Gutman for all the support that I had this time here in New York. As the Ambassador has already said, I work as an advisor to the Minister in the Ministry of Social Development in Brazil, as well as I have a background working with policies of work and income generation for low-income classes. And this presentation today is meant to be a sort of a summary of this previous experience, and I would like to take you to some recent questions, some actual questions, which we've been dealing there in Brazil. So, to start, the name of the presentation is Productive Inclusion, Opportunity for Decent Work as a Right and Not a Duty. We'll be presenting it in three parts, three different parts. First of all, I'd like to talk about the social policies in Brazil in recent years. So I'll speak about our last decade and the results and outcomes that we had through our social policies. Then we'll be discussing the productive inclusion concepts, and after that, taking you to discuss some outcomes and recent issues on this topic of the work and income generation for low-income classes. So, if we talk about our recent decade in Brazil, as you can see, Brazil could go even through our 2008 international financial crisis, Brazil could keep on growing our per capita income rate in real terms, and even through the crisis we could grow, and we could also keep our Gini going down. We could lower it from on the whole period. It's been like almost 60 years since Brazil hasn't got to get the Gini index under the 0.5 mark. So this is something important for us to be distributing income in our place. But in another point of view, it's still a challenge for us to keep on doing that. Like we're much better than we used to be, but we have a long way ahead. So this is something very important. We're on the way. This is the right way, and that's what I want to show you tonight. If we take our growth of per capita income in real terms of household income, and we divide it by the quintile of the income of the population, we can see that the 20 poorest part of our population, they could get their income to grow 6.4 at a rate of 6.4% in median, while the 20% richest could get it only to 2.5. It is good that everybody could grow their income, but it is important to highlight that the income of the 20% poorest could raise at a rate 2.6 times greater than the richest ones. So this means that we are really distributing income in Brazil, and this is something very important, and this is not a natural fact. This is not something that happens by nature. It was a decision, a political decision taken by Lula and Dilma in their governments to have public policies directed to the poor to let them access a different rate of growth in their income. If we take a look at the evolution of our minimum wage, which has been a very important policy, you can see that it raised 100% in real terms. This is something very important for the work community, and it only happened because we could get an agreement on our legislative with workers and owners to get there and make an agreement for a long-term policy of growing our minimum wage. This was awesome. It has a great impact in that distribution that we meant before, as has also the policy for growing our net jobs in Brazil, which got 21.5 million new jobs, new formal jobs to our economy through these 10 years. So as you can see, it has been our priority to generate jobs, to generate work positions for everybody, and also it has been a great policy to grow our minimum wage. I want to highlight that our social policy system, our social protection system, it has many different items that makes part of it. We have contributory benefits that goes for old ages and pensions, injury benefits. We also have unemployment benefit that can get like 7.8 million people. We have non-contributory benefits as well, as we get the social assistance benefits. And we got to create, in 2003, the Bolsa Familia program that got to be accessible, that could enroll 13.8 million families, that goes for 50 million people in Brazil receiving the Bolsa Familia. If we take a look how the poverty, the extreme poverty was distributed in Brazilian society before we had the Bolsa Familia program, this is the picture we have. Most of it's distributed by ages, and most of the poverty, the extreme poverty, is concentrated through the early ages, because we have a great net, a great social protection net that could cover the elderly, but we didn't have many benefits for the young one. And this was something important for us, that we could manage to find this picture and to see what was possible for us to do to fight poverty in Brazil. So, with the Bolsa Familia, and this was until 2011, we could get a reduction in the extreme poverty to 36%, but also it stood concentrated on the early ages. With Dilma and the decision of creating the Brazil Without Extreme Poverty plan, we could take the extreme poverty to a reduction of 89% in populational terms, in quantitative terms. And this is something very important, that we still have some people living under extreme poverty in Brazil, but the rate of extreme poverty in Brazil is getting close, if it's not still the real rate that we have from other countries, developed countries. And we're discussing now what can we do to end extreme poverty, but we do know that maybe this will be how Brazil can look in our further days. If you can keep the extreme poverty like that, this is something grateful that we should do. For those people who are still under extreme poverty, we're doing action in the government called Active Search, that is meant to get all the public services that we do have in Brazil, like education and health and all the public policy systems that we have there, and get those systems to look after those people and see if it's possible for us to register them in our unified registry, which means to be the big registry of the government on the people who are living under poverty. So this is what we're doing right now. We have all those systems mobilized. They are looking for them. But still, this is part of our challenge to get to these people. What I have to say is that we got to a reduction of 22 million people going out of extreme poverty in the last 10 years, and this is something great. But we still have 36 million people who can only be out of extreme poverty because they're receiving the Bolsa Família. We think of Bolsa Família as a right. So people don't only need the Bolsa Família, but they have the right to receive the Bolsa Família, and they will still be receiving it independent on what conditions they are, because the federal constitution of Brazil establishes that all the people should have a right for a well-being. So Bolsa Família is part of it, to let people have a well-being. But the point is, most of these people, these 36 million people, they work, and they work a lot. Some people say that they should have a work conditionality. As you know, the Bolsa Família has a health and also an educational conditionality for them to receive the benefits. And some people keep putting pressure for us to make a work conditionality. And what we are saying to them is that we have data. We've made many researches around the Bolsa Família program, and we do know that almost 75% of the Bolsa Família adults work, and they do work a lot. Actually, they work more than the median of the Brazilian population itself. They work like 10 hours a day. But what happens is that they work a lot, but they just can't earn enough for them to be out of extreme poverty. So this is the quick question for my presentation. What happens that those people can access good jobs or work opportunities for them to earn enough not to be in extreme poverty, even working as hard as they do? So this is something that we're discussing. We do have many public policies on that, and that's what I meant to show. Just one concept which I think is very useful on this discussion is that decent work is an international labor organization concept that we can use as work being a part of a freedom of organization and access, and also freedom of doing things that people want to do. This is what the workplace should be. So we're trying to get these people to access the opportunities that they aren't accessing today. And we want to know what the state can do for them to be able to have this access. This is the question. So we have a philosophical debate about whether the poor are already part of the society or no, or not. So if we're discussing productive inclusion, the inclusion word could be a discussion. I'm not going to do that discussion right here, but there is a discussion around that. There is also another discussion around the limits between markets and states, and this is something that goes long on the economic literature. We could stay here forever. And we have also another discussion around the work conditionalities for poor that I just mentioned, when 70% of the Bolsa Família works. I'm not going to get in those discussions, but we do know that this is the background in which we're dealing with. So, if you get to scales, Brazil used to deal with the employment question around the 50s as a national issue, as it was a result of macroeconomic policies. When it got to the 70s, it turned to be a regional question. So our state government started to develop some public policies for them to deal with the question. On the Federal Constitution of '88, we got that to the municipal level. And with the neoliberal view on the 90s, we got the individual to be responsible for their own condition of working. So what we are trying to overcome, trying to turn around, is to find a way that the individuals aren't responsible themselves for having these opportunities. And the state can be like a partner of them, can let them access other opportunities for them to be able to earn more than they're earning and to work well as well. If we take the point of view of the approaches, we take a look. We can work with formal jobs. We can work with individual entrepreneurship or collective self-managed firms. These are ways which we can address the problems of generating work and income for poor people. All of them has their questions. If we're talking about jobs, we can work with training or other kind of program. If we're talking about individual entrepreneurship, we can talk about credit or technical assistance. Collective self-managed firms, we have many important experiences in Brazil around the solidarity-based economy, as you do have also here in the United States, as Professor Rick Wolf told me about the work self-directed enterprises. So there is a whole world that could be discussed on each of these topics, and each of them can be an instrument for us to discuss the question. We can also talk about multiple instruments through which we can try to support their initiatives. Credit, non-repayable credit, asset donation, as also I talked to Professor Derek Hamilton, who was telling me about the idea of the baby bonds as an idea for people to be accessing some sorts of assets when they get to the youth, so they are able to have their own initiative. Public purchases, as we do have in Brazil, technical assistance, legal regulation, training. There are many instruments through which the government can help people to find their way to these better opportunities. We're trying lots of them in Brazil. We do have lots of experience, but still we have a problem there for there to access these opportunities as they should, as we think they could. If we get to the rural areas, we can see that there are lots of successful policies going around the legal regulation, land reform, credit programs. Also, we have public purchases. There are many structures and public policies already going through on rural areas which support this kind of initiative. And we have many good results. Like we could, on the last 10 years, almost double the number of, almost get to 4 times the number of credits which were operated on the rural credit of Pronafi. We also could get our food purchase program to go all over the country and reach almost 200,000 families on those 838,000 operations. We have many families which were involved, almost 2 million people that have been accessing public policies on work and income generation on rural areas in Brazil for the last 2 decades, the last decade. So these are many interesting results that we got to rural areas. What we have in rural areas, we have a foreseeable market, and this is something very interesting. People can produce what they're like. They can produce corn, tomatoes, or whatever, and they know that they will harvest tomatoes or corn or whatever. So the point is, they know what they're going to produce, and there is a market which can be foreseen in the point of view of buying it. So the state can know what it is going to buy afterwards. There is also land and the agricultural knowledge as an asset for them to work with. So this is also very important. When someone is working in a rural area, it's important for them to have an asset as land. So they will be related to it, and they'll be able to produce through it. So this is something very important as well. As we do have in Brazil, lots of organized grassroots movements which helps people to put pressure on the government and have the specific public policy that they need. So these are like things that happens in the rural areas and help them to have those public policies. But when we get to the urban areas, the things looks a bit different. Like most of the policies that are related to work and income generation in urban areas, they just seem to not reach the low-income classes. Even through many efforts that we made to take the training systems to get to low-income classes, to take credit as microcredit programs to low-income classes, when it gets on to the urban areas, it is so difficult for people to access it that even the state doing the effort it does, it's still a problem. So this is something we think is needed to discuss. We need to see what is happening on urban areas that we couldn't still get to the results, the outcomes that we were looking for there. If we see some of the Brazil without misery, without extreme poverty plan, we can see that almost we'll in the next months we'll be able to reach the goal of having 1 million people trained through the Pronatec program, which is a training program, a big training program. We have already 3 million, almost 4 million micro-entrepreneurship organizations that were organized when we approved the law, trying to simplify the bureaucratic process of creating those initiatives. And most of them, like almost 800 of them, are from the CADUNIC, which is our unified registry, so they're from poor people, and almost 400,000 were from the Bolsa Família program. It means it's not very low scale, but for Brazil it still is. So this is something we're discussing. How can we make it broader? How can we make more people access it? Also, if you get to microcredit, we have like 6 million operations that went through Brazil. Half of it was related to poor people on northeastern regions, and 2.3 of them were with Bolsa Família people. So this is something also very interesting, that people are accessing credit. But still we have 36 million to talk about. So this is something which is important. How can we make this broader? How can we make this be accessible for more people? This is another discussion. If we get to solidarity-based economy, our data that we have in Brazil for solidarity-based economy is that around 3 million workers are self-organized nowadays in Brazil. From that, we are in the Brazil Without Extreme Poverty plan supporting 8,000 workers in those self-managed firms in almost 1,500 cities, which means it's also a big program, but we need to make it bigger. So what I'm saying is not that we don't have the public policies or we don't have the right approach, but we still need to go on forth with it. And all this 12 years, 15 years experience almost that I have working with public policies, with work and income generation in Brazil has shown me that maybe there are some things that should be done for people differently from the rural areas. We still need to arrange things differently when we're talking about urban areas. Otherwise, we'll still be telling people that they are responsible for not having the access, not having access to a good work or job opportunity that they could have. So this is something that is going on. What we find is that most of the initiatives on urban areas are related to low foreseeable markets, and this is something important. The way that cities work, as we all know, is so competitive and so high dynamic that most of the initiatives, the economic initiatives, needs to be dynamic as well. And when we're talking about low-income initiatives, sometimes they just can have the dynamic that they need to compete in this environment. So this is something important to talk about. We're talking about low level of political organization, differently from the rural areas where we have the MST, the landless movement, as you might know, and I talked about that. We don't have many workers' movements rather than unions, which are related to middle classes workers. So we don't have the low-income people from urban areas organized and pressing the government for the right public policies, and this is something important. We do have some garbage pickers, which are really organized there, but not many other movements, social movements, which are so organized and so to pressure the government in the way that they need. Also, we have the problem that small businesses have a high death rate, as we all know. They have a low power of price determination, so it is very hard for them, as well as they have a high risk. So we're talking that the people which are in the most precarious situation, that aren't able to take any risk, are the ones who are submitted to the highest risk. So this is something a bit contradictory. So this is also things we have to address. So as we have been through, there are two things that maybe we could use, and these are some ideas. Maybe we should have in Brazil a new governance when we're talking about urban productive inclusion initiatives. And this could be like related as we had the Território da Cidadania, which was a great project in the rural areas. It could be taken also to metropolitan areas. I've just seen a data today that the metropolitan areas are not growing so much as, at least jobs in the metropolitan areas of Brazil are not growing as much as the non-metropolitan areas from Brazil. So this is something important. Most of the jobs are being created in the interior part of the Brazil. And this is something that could be organized through another kind of governance. And this is something we can deal with. We can study, we can see if there are other international experiences that went through, as we did with the Território da Cidadania, and maybe it could be used as a way to address the problem in urban areas. And also we could use the public data on markets and investments which will be held or financed by government in Brazil to find better opportunities for these people to organize themselves and to see if it's possible for them to access a better work opportunity, as we've been talking about. So this is the debate which we got to. I hope that it was possible for you to understand how important this is. We're trying to take out of the agenda the idea that these people need a new conditionality of work. Instead of it, we think that we should strengthen the way that the state is working with them, not to make them work even more than they're working already, but to make them work better than they're working. And this is something that the state can have a role, and this role is something we're trying to discuss here. So, thank you.
Hola, buenas noches. Pido a este auditorio me permitan dirigirme en mi lengua nativa. Yo quiero agradecerle a las directivas de esta prestigiosa institución haberme invitado a presentar una colombiana que, con todo su conocimiento y su capacidad, ha puesto y se ha atrevido a competir frente a tantas personas que sueñan con venir a hacer esta inmersión en cultura en Nueva York y en este espacio académico. Agradezco entonces a la escuela, a la nueva escuela, agradezco a este observatorio de América Latina, a la Universidad de Argentina, por generar un espacio de conversación y poderles entonces compartir un poco de la experiencia que como autoridad de Colombia he vivido en estos 2 años y medio en Nueva York. Saben ustedes que la misión de un cónsul había sido tradicional y básicamente garantizar la parte documental de sus connacionales en el país receptor. Cuando llegamos a Nueva York nos encontramos con una población muy grande. Se dice porque todos son aproximaciones. Saben ustedes que cuando se tiene una población muy grande indocumentada, poco eso se refleja en unas estadísticas. Pero podríamos decir que en el área triestatal se pueden acercar a los 500.000 colombianos que viven, muchos de ellos con dificultades en todos sus orígenes y en todas sus causas de migración, pero también muchos de ellos ligados a procesos productivos, a procesos de investigación, a procesos científicos, y es muy usual entonces que uno encuentre a colombianos muy bien rankeados en diferentes escenarios y sectores, y colombianos que hacen prosperidad en los desarrollos productivos de Nueva York. Dice el último censo de Estados Unidos que la comunidad colombiana es la que tiene mayor grado de escolaridad, y es usual que entre los profesores de las escuelas públicas de primaria y de bachillerato se encuentren con que los niños y las niñas que vienen de Colombia vienen con una importante formación académica. Todo esto nos llamó la atención para tomar la decisión que yo no quería hacer un consulado documental únicamente, y empezamos entonces una labor de hacer un consulado social basado en la educación y en la cultura. Somos unos convencidos en el gobierno de la prosperidad, el gobierno que represento del doctor Juan Manuel Santos, que lo único que nos va a permitir a los países de Latinoamérica salir de la trampa de la pobreza es la educación, y que lo que nos va a permitir trascender como nación va a ser la cultura. Saben ustedes que llevamos ya 2 años intentando una vez más la paz en Colombia, y por lo tanto nos estamos preparando para una etapa de posconflicto. En esa etapa de posconflicto toma total vigencia el esfuerzo académico e intelectual que esta gran colombiana, filósofa, magíster en filosofía de la Universidad Nacional, una persona que tuvo la ventaja de haber trabajado con el profesor Mocus. Si ustedes no saben, el profesor Mocus fue alcalde de Bogotá en un momento especial de transición. Bogotá venía de ser una aldea con muchos edificios y con mucho cemento, y se fue transformando en una gran urbe de Latinoamérica. Y esa Bogotá en ese momento tuvo la fortuna de tener una persona como Antanas Mocus al frente, e intentar a través de acciones y de prácticas culturales contribuir para que los nacidos en Bogotá o los llegados a Bogotá sintiésemos pertenencia por Bogotá, por el distrito capital. Un distrito especial con aproximadamente 8 millones de habitantes, es hoy entonces la capital de Colombia, que ha elegido sus últimas alcaldías a personas de origen claro y público de izquierda. Es una ciudad que le da lecciones de democracia tanto a Colombia como al mundo. Una ciudad que se mueve por el voto de opinión, y una ciudad que no se restringe únicamente a tener unos museos o unos espacios cerrados, sino que ha desafiado al mundo y ha desafiado a Colombia en el sentido de que Bogotá misma debe ser un museo a cielos abiertos, y es usual que ustedes encuentren murales, parques, exposiciones en sitios públicos. El nuevo desarrollo urbanístico de Bogotá en sí mismo ya es una obra de arte. Ese esfuerzo que han hecho varias alcaldías por sostener una ciclovía, todas estas transformaciones culturales del día sin carro, todo eso son mensajes que se han logrado con un aporte fuerte cultural. Y esta muchacha entonces, que es premiada para que venga a esta inmersión en cultura, María Villa, les comparte en este ensayo las experiencias significativas sobre cómo ha logrado ella en su momento como servidora pública, y cómo propone ahora que haya una buena relación entre los artistas, entre la cultura y la política. Yo soy una persona con toda una vida política por delante y en mi historia. Yo hago parte de esa clase política que no se avergüenza de decir que hace política, así como quienes están en carrera diplomática sacan pecho diciendo que son de carrera diplomática, o los militares, o los magistrados. Yo hago parte de una clase política en Colombia que se resiste al estigma de tener que ser señalados porque tenemos una vocación de servicio. Y yo tengo que compartir en este espacio académico que desafortunadamente la cultura ha sido muchas veces marginada de los presupuestos porque hay un claro divorcio entre la cultura y los políticos. Y yo no sé si es que los políticos hemos sido lo poco sensatos o visionarios para no apropiarnos de lo cultural, o han sido los artistas los que se meten en una élite y se marginan ellos mismos. Esa discusión hay que abrirla y sobre todo en un espacio como estos. Nos tenemos que atrevernos a mirarnos a los ojos y decirlo. Yo de regreso a mi país, una vez termine mi misión, me falta 1 año y medio para ello, quiero hacer parte de un proyecto de cultura y política. Y por eso recibo en muy buen momento esta reflexión que nos hace María, porque sobre todo en Colombia, que nos tenemos que preparar para el posconflicto, y también en Latinoamérica, nos tenemos que atrever a acabar con ese divorcio. Tenemos que unir el concepto de lo cultural con lo público. Nos tenemos que atrever a decirle a los artistas que vayan a los congresos donde se legislan, donde se toman las decisiones presupuestales en el mundo, para que hagan advocacy, para que hagan influencia y para que los presupuestos de cultura en el mundo sean más incluyentes. Y habrá que decirle también a los artistas que aprovechando la sensibilidad genuina que tienen, sean tolerantes, abracen a la clase política, nos ayuden a transformar acciones que nos traigan prácticas sanas, saludables y artísticas a la vida política. Y yo tengo la certeza que si muchos artistas se involucran con la política, la humanidad va a cambiar. Yo tengo la certeza que si muchos artistas y muchas personas expertas en arte, como el caso de María, se atreven a meterse en la política sin repudio, sin indiferencia, se atreven a apropiarse de los espacios políticos, esto va a cambiar. Quisiéramos que en Colombia hubiesen muchos Mocus, pero también muchas Marías, muchos Juan, Pedro, muchas personas. Bienvenidos al mundo de la política. Allá se toman las decisiones. Yo fui 2 veces concejala de mi ciudad. Yo soy de Pereira, una ciudad eje de todo el eje cafetero. Fui 2 veces concejala, diputada, fui consejera presidencial para la equidad de la mujer. Estuve 2 años en ese cargo y renuncié para aceptar un desafío muy grande de mi vida, aspirar a ser la gobernadora de Risaralda de mi departamento. Logré ser gobernadora de Risaralda por elección popular en momentos difíciles para Colombia en el tema de seguridad, de tanta discriminación que sigue habiendo por las mujeres, de tantas dificultades, mas sin embargo logré hacerlo. Y así como uno acepta esos desafíos, yo quiero invitarles a todos ustedes a que se atrevan a acercarse a los tomadores de decisiones. En las ciudades, quienes toman las decisiones para que los institutos de cultura y las casas de la cultura tengan presupuesto, quienes toman esas decisiones son los concejales. Hay que abordar a los concejales y a los alcaldes, y en las asambleas con los gobernadores y en el Congreso frente al presupuesto de cada nación. Yo entonces celebro y veo con unos ojos muy esperanzadores esta propuesta reflexiva que nos hace María. Me siento llena de orgullo como autoridad colombiana en Nueva York, acompañarla a ella en ese momento tan importante para la vida de ella, pero también para miles de colombianos y de colombianas que siguen teniendo el sueño americano. Qué bueno que el sueño americano para los latinos fuese relacionado con la cultura, fuese relacionado con la educación. Pero María, no se amañe aquí. haga esta inmersión y vuélvase para Colombia. Yo lo que le pido a la juventud colombiana es que salgan a rastrear el mundo, que salgan a escanear el mundo, que salgan a conocer y a reflexionar el mundo, pero que vuelvan a Colombia. En Colombia necesitamos de la fuerza, la reflexión, el amor de la juventud. No queremos más cerebros jugados. Yo creo que tenemos que hacer un esfuerzo mayúsculo en los países de Latinoamérica, así como la lección que nos están dando los asiáticos. Yo vivo en un edificio de 50 pisos y el 90% de los habitantes de ese edificio son asiáticos, aquí en la 42. Los asiáticos nos están dando una gran lección, la hicieron en innovación, en ciencia, en tecnología, y la están haciendo en cultura, y la están haciendo... Yo no sé si aquí han conversado y mirado las estadísticas, que en la China hay 450.000 escuelas de piano. ¿Sí pueden creer eso? Y los muchachos para estudiar allá música tienen que practicar 12 horas diarias. Con todo lo que quieran criticarlos, están veloces. 12 horas diarias practicando el piano. Se están acercando a Beethoven. En Brasil. ¿Todos entienden español o no? No saben lo que se han perdido. Muy bien. Bueno, hacemos un resumen. Yo les agradezco mucho, es que si me dejan alargar, yo les podría hablar muchas razones. Primero, para que no se amañen acá, para que vuelvan a sus países de origen. Y segundo, para decirles que se apropien de lo público. Nosotros necesitamos que en la política de los países latinoamericanos hayan artistas y gente que haya venido a la academia a aprender de la importancia del arte, que es lo que nos va a permitir trascender como naciones.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Let me just try to very, very briefly summarize. The ambassador commented that as normally a consul general comes in and is concerned with the papers and documents of the people from her country. But what she's realized here in the United States and certainly in New York is there's a very, very large Colombian population, and many of whom are in very high levels in the society and many are related to culture. And so she believes very strongly in the importance of culture as it connects to development, and she's very pleased particularly to welcome María here, because Maria's work also connects to culture. She made an impassioned, I would say, an impassioned plea for María and for artists to connect the culture and politics. And I think that's a very important thing, and it's a very appropriate in this room. All right? This is above all a political room filled with culture. So I just want to thank you very much, and now I'd like to welcome María Villa.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. I would like to thank the New School and the Observatory of Latin America for inviting me here to share my project, also to la Universidad Nacional de San Martín in Argentina. And especially to Michael Cohen and Margarita Gutman for the work they've been doing, welcoming us and connecting us to such a rich network of people in faculty and outside the university as well. The project I'm going to be presenting tonight is kind of unusual in this auditorium, I guess. But it's very related to public policy in a very particular way. In order to explain how I ended up working with contemporary art and visual arts in particular, I would have to start explaining a little bit of my background. I'm a philosopher and I have a master's in philosophy. I dedicated many years of my life to understand and discuss ethical issues, political issues on a multicultural democracy, thinking that was a good way to approach to my specific context, Colombia, a country that, as many of you know, has been putting up with the war for over 50 years. That war doesn't only affect the rural areas, it affects the cities, and it has been making very dramatic growth for the cities in the last 40 years as well. So we have very complex cities where a lot of clashes happen, not only political, but social and cultural. I wanted to address that. Of course, philosophy wasn't an entirely good tool to do it. So after doing my master's, I wanted to really start analyzing and studying behavior and in everyday life fashion. I worked with Antanas Mocos, former mayor of Bogota, twice mayor of Bogota, and he was doing very interesting social research that not only analyzed why people behave how they do, but also is comparing violence with trust among citizens, the reasons to engage in violence and also to break the law, and trying to explain that he also developed a way to intervene over that and assess impact. That was a very interesting approach for me to get to know, and he calls it cultural agency. And in his strategies, he often works with visual aids, visual tools, and interaction as means to change behavior, create awareness in people, raise awareness in people, and about public space, about what we all share and what separates us. Later, I worked with the public office in Bogota, a city like she said, I'm sorry, 8 million people live there, and I work with the public office that fosters the arts. That means basically what we want to do is make the art field stronger, but also have an impact on overall society in our city. So in that, working in the public office, I started basically trying to relate these two main issues. I wanted to work with the visual arts, but also try to address political and ethical issues through them. The project I'm presenting tonight explains how those two are related. And I want to make clear that I'm not trying to instrumentalize arts to serve for political or ethical ends, and I'm not either trying to make visual arts stronger by looking into them and finding what there's political or ethical about them. I want to try and promote both things at the same time, and I'm going to show you how. So when working in policy making, there's several things you have to do to foster the arts and promote art as a cultural field. Often what you do is give money to people that create and make it accessible to people that want to see it. Make it circulate, buy events, records, books, exhibitions. The budget, the approximate budget for that kind of support to the arts goes around 75%, not only in visual arts, but also music, theater, film, literature. In the case of visual arts, it's invested not only in creation, but in residences, exchanges, and also in producing exhibitions. But in order to actually support the field, what you have to do is you have to put a lot of energy and effort in seeing how people is engaging with art, and whether is it consumed or not. And also you have to support research and criticism, which in turn will fuel up education and will make possible to improve creation and guarantee quality in creation. But only 25% of the budget goes to that kind of support. The thing is, the cultural field needs support in all of those 5 dimensions. And because only that way it becomes sustainable, and artists are less inclined to depend exclusively on grants and on the government. In our case, we don't have as much private investment in the arts as you do in New York. So the question is art having the impact we expect for it to have, or are we just, giving money to artists to create? And are really local audiences engaged with whatever we're exposing to them or making accessible? Working in the public office, that was the problem I had to deal with. The truth is that according to the Observatory of Culture in Bogota, only 8% of people is actually attending exhibitions in a frequent, with enough frequency, like once a year or twice a year. The rest of them declare not to be interested in them or just are completely alien to them. So when working in a public gallery of the Capital District, I had to face many, many challenges. One thing, and this is what I'm going to show, is probably something you already know, but this is very strong in my context for reasons that I'm going to explain right now. So one problem is the image or the idea people have of museums, and the fact that they're not attractive for people that is looking mostly for entertainment and big performances and shows and music and film, mostly film. The other problem we have is the art field has a cultural capital that's different from the audiences, the broad audiences. I'm talking, about the whole population, not just the people that's highly educated, higher level education. Of course, those people is able to and willing to and interested in art, contemporary art, I mean. And then a lot of works of art seem to be participatory, but in the end, we don't really know if they are actually doing that. And another thing that happens is that people often don't engage in a creative way, in a critical way with art, because they're basically educated in a different cultural, artistic or symbolic education. Their background is different. So when we talk about artists wanting people to participate, I would like to just give an example of what happens sometimes. And this is a cruel example maybe. An artist had this idea of presenting a blank canvas just with the word I, in Spanish, yo, wanting to welcome people to participate in his work. This way, at the end of the exhibition, what you would have is a lot of people would fill up this canvas with their participation. He left a seal for people to stamp on the canvas. And the final work would be the result of a lot of people being the artists. So he wanted to decenter the artists and eliminate this individual genius. This is what happened. People, of course, want to participate, but they're not willing to do it just in the terms that of the artist pretended to. That happened in the gallery I used to work with as an educational coordinator. And it's pretty convenient that they did it in English, so I can share it with you easily. They not only work on the canvas, but they started vandalizing the wall next to it, and then they wanted to even started approaching other pieces that were hung in the space. And I had to ask the artist, what do we do here? Of course, people want to participate. In what terms do we do this? And the artist said, well, the only thing I can think of is, why don't you chain the stamp, and so the radio that you can affect is limited. And I said, okay, if you agree to do that, I don't think anything else could be done instead of just taking away the stamp. But in a way, that was very weird for me. It was like having a mad dog chained to one of the walls. I cannot release it because it will destroy everything. And that was public participation, a mad dog. So why am I interested in contemporary art? I'm not talking about all the art that's being produced, of course. I'm interested in art that's critical in many different ways. I'm going to just let you with some of the reasons that I find interesting here. Art is broadening the spectrum of what's considered artistic, is being less focused on the genius of artists, individual artists. It's very critical towards the consumer system and environmental disasters, things like you all know, injustices in many scenarios. And it's also welcoming interdisciplinary work and welcoming the audience to participate. And those works of art are really relevant, and I think they have a great potential. Also, they are involving multicultural values, and they are rejecting the distinction between high and low culture. So if you want to work with that kind of art, you can't possibly work with a usual approach. You need to do something different, and you need to address the audience horizontally. So you need to close a gap, for sure, because artists don't share the same codes as audiences. You need critical pedagogy, because you need to use that critical potential in art and make it active. And constructivist meaning making. That means we build the meaning and the truth about art, we build it with a group, with people discussing it. The curator may say what they want, or the critic. That's just another opinion we have to work with. So this isn't what I'm expecting for people to feel when they enter the gallery I work with. I don't want them to feel like they have to read 7 books to understand art, and I don't then want them to feel threatened by art. And I don't want to have just like a lectured robot explaining art. I don't want this kind of character telling them what to think about art. I mean, of course I would like to have that character if I could hire him. It'd be much more appealing than the usual museum guide. So my question is, may art do something with our political and ethical grounds? May it activate us ethically? Can it reconnect us to each other, make us more human to each other, or reconcile us with our identity or our community? I think there's a way to do that, and I'm going to show you briefly what I did. I've been working 3 years in this, actively working on it, doing experiments that aim to activate the social relevance of art. How did I do that? Trying to innovate the methods I use to discuss, dialogue, and interact with people in the gallery. So I just work on strategies that let me do that. For 3 years, and in this gallery, and in the main art fair, international art fair we have in Bogota, Arbo. This is a gallery I used to work with. This huge space, and just to give you a glimpse of what how big that gap is. When people enter this exhibition, what they normally think is, so machetes, these are blades, this is a commentary on violence and massacres in Colombia, and the artist is just, what actually making me feel afraid of walking under these blades, because this is how it feels. It's really close to your head when you walk inside the room. And I had to work with all kinds of public here, and even the people that's more educated, they would assume that it was a very threatening picture of sugarcane plantation. These are machetes for cutting sugarcane. But the truth is, this work is about the laborers. It's those 580 machetes hanging from the ceiling are actually a commentary on the artist's father, who was a laborer for years, Afro-Colombian laborer, like most of the people that work in these plantations under very harsh conditions and very underpaid. So I have to make that gap narrow, at least, or discuss that. Okay, so what I did was develop an approach where I would mediate between art and their audiences and try to create that dialogue by using interaction and different means. The idea underneath all this is that the artists, when they enter the gallery, they need to learn how to communicate, but the audience is also learning how to make connections with art and connections to their own lives, their day-to-day lives. This is the big project of the book, the art fair in Bogota. It was a huge project. It was a 4-day event. It lasted very short, but it was a very big space where I welcomed families and also public schools. And we did experience that included many things, from observation to creating and also exhibiting the results. We had 1,700 people attending in those 4 days, and I'm going to share a few of the results of the strategies that I implemented. This is a work of art by Alberto Baraya. It's a very delicate and sophisticated, subtle approach to botanical expeditions in Latin America. And nobody, or a few people, really understand what this artwork is about, because it's basically plants dissected, but plastic plants, contemporary plants, dissected on the wall like an archive of our fake nature. Of course, this is not exciting for anybody. But I wanted to make a new botanical expedition, so I invited kids in this art ball fair to create a specimen, and I gave them a file where they would answer these questions about the plants they wanted to create. I asked them, okay, so imagine you're going to go into the Amazon jungle and find the most weird and amazing plant you can think of. Tell me, how does it smell like? How long does it take to grow? And specifically, there was one question that really triggered interesting things. Indigenous people traditionally used it for. The answers they gave me, they were really amazing. I'm going to share with you. I also gave them a little bit of inspiration. They didn't need it at all. I don't know if they ignored it, but of course it wasn't necessary. People have a great imagination. One of the big challenges I have when I do this kind of strategies is making people willing to create and having them not use cliches and stereotypes. How do you make people create something that's really, really new and new to themselves? So, just a second. So this is the file they would create for the plants. This plant in particular is used to cure the dementia of politicians. And I also asked what bug eats it or what animal eats it, and they explained how this bug doesn't eat it. Actually, what it does is protect it. This one is probably by a 14-year-old, and this plant comes from Mount Olympus, and it's used to cure pregnancy. And I have to say that this is Colombia has the highest rate, one of the 3 highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the South Americas, with Venezuela and Ecuador. 20% of the women that are pregnant are under 17-year-olds. So that's things that are really relevant for people are coming here. Magical thinking is expressing something that's beyond botanicals. This was what it looked like afterwards. My idea was that people would actually make a work of art collectively that was similar to the artist, that would help them make sense of what the artist was doing. This is an archive of our imaginary ideas of what plants could do. I'm going to go very fast to show you the visuals because they are really amazing. In terms of non-stereotypic plants. So some of these plants were used to make soup or fuse metals or see the future. Some are used to recognize the soul of each person. Some absorb the smoke at night. Some are used to sleep better or either keep awake. Some stimulate love. Some are used to scare the death away, or curing the dementia of politicians is another. And one is actually they didn't use it at all, as they were afraid to extinguish it. And this last one is pretty interesting because not only children engage in this exercise, also adults did it for their own sake. This one was drawn by a 52-year-old man, and the name of the plant is Palm of Friendship, which is not only complex but visually amazing. But why would you mention friendship here? It was not actually required. So the results I'm getting out of these strategies are really interesting in many ways. So my question at the beginning was that, how do I activate the relevance of art? And then I asked myself, okay, after doing all those strategies, I want to understand what's meaningful for people when they engage in these experiences. So I do need to innovate, but I also need to do a little research and debate on what's happening there. So that's how I created a laboratory in 2015, targeted to educators to analyze the results of these mediation practices and try to understand what was happening there. This was also supported by the Capital District office that promotes the art, IDARTES. That's the organization I work with. And I designed the whole curricula, and I provided, the idea was to provide scaffolding for these teachers and artists to develop creative strategies for different audiences in the city. There were 12 projects implemented in 12 different venues in the city, not only museums, but also all places where community art is developed. We had guest docents. It was basically about debating, but also a think tank to develop strategies and doing field work. A publication is going to sum up the tools and the experiences of those 12 fellows that participated in the process and had the tutoring of me and other docents. This is basically what we studied for the ones that are interested in the detail of how we approach pedagogical strategies. We were working with a lot of improvisation, and we involved the body as a tool. This isn't just about discussing art. And we were working with a constructivist approach. And this also is, I didn't give them a formula to do things. What I wanted these teachers to do was to try to create strategies for learning that involved the 4 squares there. Because we're often used to work with the lower level, thinking and observing in a conceptual and reflective way, which is very important. But actually, that's just one way of learning, the verbal way. So by involving sensing, feeling, and making, you actually get to develop ways to learn dynamically through solving problems and also through imagination. So that was basically what we wanted to do. To what extent did we do that? That's another question. But okay, so I just want to show you one example, and I'll be finishing soon. This girl wanted to work with the part of one of the main museums we have, with the collection that was historical, with the part of the museum that nobody wants to look at, religious art from the 16th century. Because it was the most boring, and also because she's been developing a project on gender issues. She's an artist, and she really actively engaged in these discussions. So she wanted to address the Immaculate Conception. For those of you who are Catholic, there's a lot to do and discuss in that territory. So she wanted to work with adolescents, teenagers, and to understand the ideas of purity in females through their pain and the fact that they deny pleasure and how they see their bodies, how they address their own bodies. That's something that's still alive in our contemporary society, the ideas about femaleness and the body of the woman. But it turned out they were working with both genders. And what she did is she tried to compare that to the contemporary ways of addressing pain and pleasure in the body and the idea of the female body in contemporary advertisement. She proposed these kids to draw the silhouettes of females and males on these very big sheets of paper, and then to make a map of pleasure and pain. She would ask them to write down the things that are pleasurable or painful in the specific spots where you feel them in your body. So it was mapping up the feelings and emotions in the body related to different things. These are some of the maps that they did. For those who know Spanish, it's pretty evident what's happening there, but I'm just going to go do a close-up. So a few words actually involved both colors because they were both painful and pleasurable, like tickling or caress. Love, of course, is red, and music is red. But then it's interesting that they had to dress up this girl to actually acknowledge her as a girl, and fix her hair weirdly. One of these hands, the one farther away from me, is used to hit, and the other is used to caress or touch. Massage come in red, and then cramps or standing in blue. And this is one of the most interesting ones. In the upper part, what you have is fatness, heaviness, stretched clothes, dieting, and cramps. This is a girl's silhouette. And then the mixture of the two colors, clean and clean, that's the first word, and then sex, penetration, and intimacy. These are adolescents. In them, of course, this is a very complex issue, but they had to negotiate, girls and boys, where to put what word. And so I'm sure they started from these pictures that were very bucolic and Catholic approached, and I am sure they left that day from the museum thinking the museum can be actually something very interesting. So that's basically very good for us, and it's I'm sure the directors of the museum wouldn't dream of something like this happening there. So when I say meaningful experience, I mean it resonates in many levels. And why do I think that contemporary art gives room for learning? Because it is cross-generational. People get to direct where they're going and what they do. They are challenged, but also when they assume that challenge and welcome it, it's rewarding for them in several levels. And they're cooperating and working together among strangers. So, yes, we help artists communicate. We're doing that. We definitely want art to be more understood, better understood. But we're also trying to create an impact. And I think so far what I can say is people is reactivating creativity where they weren't expecting to do it. And what is resonating here symbolically often is ethic as well. And I think sometimes there's trust being created between people, because they are in the space that's a gallery or a museum that's a safe environment for this discussion. Also, they're having a voice in a space that normally doesn't welcome them to speak. I address museums and galleries as public forums. I refuse to see them as temples of the culture. So what have I know that it's my challenges for the future. Definitely, the resistance of people is strong, and I have to really make an effort to cut and dismount shortcut responses, because a lot of people just respond with whatever they have at hand. That's not necessarily the most creative way of responding to challenges. And also what we need so far is a way to understand and make sense and analyze the documentation we have on these strategies. Finally, I started with ethics. I want to end with ethics. What I do here is an ethical exploration that is involving a lot of issues and threading them together. All those things that you see in that map are being touched or used or activated in the strategies I develop. I hope you're not too tired, because I'm going to make this a little bit more complex now. They're not only these subjects, but subjects that actually connect them together. So I'm going to just go very fast through them so you can read them, the area that you're more interested in. Ethics for me isn't exactly up there. It's the thing that threads all this and makes it alive. Thank you very much.
I'm going to do something a little unfair to my comrades up here. And I'll say that after I do this, there will be time for you to respond and make questions, but it's always good. It's always the moderator's job to start that so that you have time to think. And usually the moderator's job is to ask a very easy softball question that joins the two talks together. But they're actually, I think, in very interesting dialogue with each other. And in a second, I'm actually going to ask them each to comment on the other. I was thinking as I listened to them both of the saying of the Russian-American anarchist Emma Goldman, lived in New York for much of her life, who famously said in response to kind of radical Puritanism, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution." It was a point about the need for both cultural emancipation and economic emancipation, and it seems to me that we had a talk that was very much about economic inclusion and the emancipatory role for the very poor of policies in Brazil, and a talk about the emancipatory possibilities of artistic of public art making and public art community building. So as I thought about the dialogue between them, here's how I'd like to kind of open up the conversation. When I was listening to Fernando, I thought a lot about the word decent in decent work, because a lot of the policies that he told us about seemed to me about work, not really that in ways that I could specify about social integration and expressiveness and the things that were included in decent work. So my question for María is, how would she use artistic practices to help figure out what decent work is when Fernando brings her into Brazil to help her with this policy making? And my question for Fernando is, how do you think about access to cultural experiences as an important dimension of the economic policies that you have? You go first. I told you it was going to be unfair.
Okay. Does this work? I think I have addressed the issue before. I'm sorry if I don't.
Sure.
Okay.
Speak to all of us.
I have addressed the issue before, and I did it with the picture that's in the brochure. The one that the exhibition with the machetes that I presented before. when we were looking for a picture to put in the ad for this lecture, I figured it was a good one to use, because I had a lot of discussions with the artist about his background and his dad, and the fact that he had seen his father, you know, the hardships that he went through during 40 or 50 years now, and he still works in plantations, and he worked on his father and another 2 sugarcane cutters for this exhibition to do a performance sharpening their tools for a good 30 minutes of noise. And it was a perturbing noise. It was perturbing for people, because it really was like looking at someone that does this every day, has been doing it for 50 years and has never been recognized. And the exhibition was a way to make a homage to all those anonymous heroes we have in our everyday lives. So despite the fact that it was very spectacular and people wanted to talk about violence and strikes and plantations, I wanted to talk about anonymous heroes. So what I did, was to ask the kids to think. At the bottom of the room, there was the working clothes of these people, folded delicately, very, you know, minimalistically, because it's contemporary art, so you have to do it on a white cube, right? And it's perfect, and it looks like nobody has used it ever. But they were in fact their clothes, and the tools that they sharpened the day they did the performance. And when kids were welcomed into the room to understand the piece, what I did was to ask them to draw the clothes of their own parents at work and their tools. And when they all had drawn this, we shared the result, and each of them had to talk about their parents and what they do and whatever they were doing every day. And so that's how I explained, well, these are the tools of the artist's father. So imagine if you could, these days we'd have tons and tons of laptops up there hanging from the ceiling, but a lot of people still use tools, real tools, and there were kids that would hang, you know, like brooms. I remember an example. There was brooms, you know, 600 brooms. What would your mother feel walking under those 600 brooms?
Seems to me this word recognition is a really helpful word for thinking about one of the qualities of decent work.
Yeah. Well, actually, Maria was fair enough with me, because when we did our first seminar and I presented, she was with us. She got to a point which is very interesting to discuss decent work. That is the human element, I may call that. That is asking, if we're talking about numbers and about opportunities, but if we get to the people and talk to them, do they want to be part of it? That was the question that she said to me. So maybe this is part of the discussion. Like, but I would address the cultural issue in another point of view, which I've been talking to Professor Carlos Teixeira. We were discussing the kind of opportunity that we can actually promote these days by public policies, and he said most of them are related to mechanical works or services. Why aren't we talking about other kinds of work? And not trying to take it to the human capital discussion, but also on the other point of not only on the demand, not only on the supply side of jobs and work markets, but also on the supply side. What are you talking about when you're talking about opportunities? So he was telling me about an experience that he's been dealing with, which is the knowledge broking experience. That means to take advantage of some data from private firms even, to get to know how markets are operating and to see if it's possible for us to organize collective groups, firms, co-ops, whatever. And this could be done also with low-income people. They could have access to data, market data, for them to organize themselves. And I think that the cultural area, the creation of culture and this kind of thing, the creation part, could also be an interesting place to be. I used to be involved in a what you call here public engagement project by the University of São Paulo. There we call it extension, which was related to give support to popular cooperatives. It was called Technological Incubator for Popular Cooperatives. And we could get to some groups that could only think about working on services, but we only got to work with people who were on artistic activities. And it was awesome to have the university helping them to organize themselves and to see if they could make a COP and maybe aggregate value on their work. And this is like an opportunity that could be held not only with university students, but maybe we could do it with popular culture as well, and many other communities that could take advantage of the cultural assets that they have, and maybe take it to be an opportunity for them to have a better and a decent work or job position.
I want to invite folks to raise their hand with comments or questions, but I also want to, and in a second I hope I'll call on you. It seems to me the story of the Machete exhibition and the brooms is also a story not just about work that counts as cultural, but about the importance of storytelling, any kind of work, and making expressive meaning out of that. And that would happen not just in museums and exhibition spaces, but in rural communities and all the different settings you're talking about. Thoughts, comments?
I have a question for María. I was very struck by the Council General.
If I understood Cynthia's question right, it was this, particularly in the Colombian context of conflict. We might understand Maria's practice. The question was, should we understand Maria's practice as a form of inclusion or a kind of critical therapy to provide people with tools for making sense of the situation of conflict?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm interested in art as much as I'm interested in politics. So I try to do both. And the fact is that I do think that artists have a lot to say, and they are being misunderstood all the time and ignored. And so I'm trying to work for them and make the conversation for them wider, and for them to actually receive that input and also question themselves a little bit about what they're doing and what that's conveying to other people. But I definitely want art to be the room, the territory where we can talk civilized, in a civilized way, and we can open emotionally as well. It's just not, gallery is not supposed to be the United Nations. And of course, sometimes it is. If you go to Queen's Museum, you'll find an example of that just now. But what I want to do is make little forums where people can address the violence they live with every day, and the micro violence, not just the huge violence in the news, the one that they inflict to each other with little gestures. And that's I mean, one thing is to work with the victims, the direct victims of the conflict. That I think is a very honorable job. But I think the problem is in all of us, not just the people that created that as victimaries or the victims. We're all creating the problem.
Chris.
A question for each person. Fernando, there's an interesting tension in your talk.
Let me ask each of you to just quickly restate the question before you.
You want me to do it? Okay. Well, Chris gently again asked or talked about a tension that exists in my presentation in between the stats and the data that I could show, and that Brazil is doing so good, and the need that we have for social movements to be organized, for them to put some pressure on the government and on the state, for it to be able to make other policies. Is that, Chris? Okay. So I really think that we're in a excellent way. We're in an excellent track, and Brazil is really on track. I have some data here, other data that I didn't show there that I could put here, like having our unemployment on the 6% basis, which is almost full unemployment in Brazil. We have growth. Our GDP was growth in a high rate, and we got to 2.2 billion reais, which is very much for us. Not only in per capita terms and many other things. We could get like 42 million people to what we are calling middle class in Brazil, which is a different concept, but they for sure are in a better situation. But the point is, even being on the good track, we still have a long way to go. And we have many pressure in Brazil for us to go out of this way. We're going through elections on October, and we know this will certainly be part of the discussions, that as long as we've achieved such a good point on Brazilian history, we may be in the time to make some changes. And what at least I've been part of, and I've been seeing for the last decade, is that I don't think we need many changes right now. We really need to keep on track. And it is important for us, and this is something very difficult to discuss there, that we will only be able to keep on this track if we have people pressuring for us to be on that. I don't know if I make myself clear, but as long as we don't have people pressuring for more services, more budget on social policies, and everything, we'll have the markets and the financial markets, for instance, pressuring us to not discuss our long-term minimum wage raising policy and this kind of our employment generation, saying that we are budgetly unsustainable. I also have some data to show that that's not true. We haven't reached not even the bottom, or not even close to that. We're still growing. There was something that happened last week that was very interesting. People were saying that Brazil is going to a mess in its economy, and our official statistics were pointing to 1.9 of growth rate, and it happens that we got to a 2.3 growth rate. It just went through. Like we were saying that we were going to get a 1.9, we got a 2.3. If it happened on the opposite, we were saying a 2.3 and we got to a 1.9, it would be like a mess. Like Brazil is lying about its growth. They're enriching data, and it happens on the opposite. And what we got is nothing. It's like it's normal. So I think, Chris, that part of this discussion goes for this kind of thing. We need people on street pressuring government to have this kind of policy that we're still having today. Otherwise, the change will happen, and maybe not in the way that we want it to happen.
Okay, the question for me was about the botanical expedition. Yes, well, when I was doing the strategy in this big art fair, the artist came by chance with his kids to the pavilion, and I was very happy to see him. I welcomed him in, telling him we were doing actually some kind of homage to his work, that we were explaining it to people, and he was very excited about it and said, well, okay, and we also have like a revisited work of yours hanging in the other part of the pavilion. So I took him there, and he was really, really excited to see the results. I think that he never expected people to be able to do something like that in 20 minutes, adults and kids, because it was a very fast exercise, and he was, I don't think he ever works like that in other contexts, and he was fascinated because it was telling him what people is able to put with their magical thinking into plants, and how plants are something that's completely related to what we imagine is nature, and also how plants were being used to conduct their dreams, to project dreams. So I think that he never expected something like that, and of course it's very creative of people to do it, and that doesn't mean that his work isn't as interesting as everybody considers it, because a lot of people love his work. He's very appreciated in the art field in Colombia and abroad. But I do think it tells a story about what art could be doing and is not doing. And so not always. I mean, a lot of people is working with communities, a lot of people is actually going and working with people, and that's part of the active project they're doing. But the beautiful thing about this is the fact that just exposing this artwork and a strategy to many people, because there was a lot of people visiting that place, triggers a response that's very valuable for the artists and for the institution as well, to see how people is taking art in and giving something back. So I do think the input is very important for the artist. And it has happened before, I mean, in other strategies that I shared in the seminars, where the artists are really moved by responses of people.
It's interesting that both of those are stories about community response making thinkable what wouldn't have been thinkable for the state or for the artists. It's 8 o'clock. I want to thank both of our guests and to all of you for coming. Thank you.